to start off, let me see, make sure I got my mic on. We're going to start off, can you hear me? All right. We're going to start off with a very good morning. Good morning. Good morning. You know how wonderful that feels? Because I'm going to tell you, it's very warm. That's a warm thank you. And I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, when I first came over here, I live in North Carolina, and I opened the door. As soon as I got off the airplane, I said, oh my goodness, it's cold. I am very fragile. I'm not a robust human being. And keep in mind, it's kind of interesting. I grew up in the Rockies. I grew up in the border between Colorado and New Mexico. How many have been to Santa Fe, New Mexico? I grew up north of that. And so I should be used to snow and those kind of things. But living in North Carolina, I forgot about cold. North Dakota reminded me. So it's good to be here. Folks, what I'm going to share with you is a journey. I'm going to take you to a journey with me for the last 10 years. And really, it's really a journey through my whole conservation life. But the last 10 years, I think, is where I became cognizant. Actually, woke out of a coma. And what I mean by this, ladies and gentlemen, is I didn't realize how fragile modern agriculture is. And also how fragile my life is, because as I traveled the whole country, as I got to see farms and ranches all over. Ladies and gentlemen, I have been in 50 states in the last 2, 3, 4 years. I think I live in the airplane. I have seen some of the cream of the cream, and I have seen other farms and ranches that are not cream of the cream. So what I'm going to share with you today is I'm going to take you to a journey to show you what I have observed as I fly the country, as I see this incredibly awesome country. And I titled my slide presentation is How Fragile is Your Farm, Ranch, or Life? You would probably say, well, did you say this was about your life? It's really not. It's about, I want to show you my journey and what I've experienced, what I see with agriculture, and how my life has changed. But before we do that, I hope to get some of these objectives across with my whole talk. Now, please bear in mind, I'm a little ADHD, dyslexic, so we'll hope that it goes in a nice, smooth way. First, understand what is fragile and anti-fragile. The word fragile is like you think about something in your house that's incredibly brittle. It doesn't like disturbance. Like dishes, like mama's dishes. You don't want too much disturbance in that. If the cat or the dog walks in and breaks the dishes, you want the condition to be always the same. Fragile. And then anti-fragile, the best explanation that I can think about anti-fragile is the natural ecosystem. It can handle disturbances. It can handle massive drought. It can handle flood. And it still functions. What I want to get across is we want our farms and ranches to be robust, heading towards anti-fragile. We want to talk about it, and I'll bring that more. We'll bring it more to play. And I'm going to talk about what causes our lives and our farms and our ranches to become fragile. Okay? And how to make the system more robust. Let's go down there. Here's the first one. I use Gabe, because I think this is probably one of the most profound statements that Gabe made. Makes quite a bit of them. You learn. Let me tell you, learning is a two-way street. I realize that 99% of my problem is when I look in the mirror, I realize I am the problem. The way I think, the way I look at my fellow men, the way I look at the creation, I'm the problem. I realize it's the way I look at things makes it fragile. Because you've got to remember, you, ladies and gentlemen, You are your farm and your ranch. It is part of your life. It's part of your inner being. So the way you think is the way your farm and ranch is going to operate. I'm going to talk about that. So to me, this has been the greatest roadblock of spreading soil health through the whole country, is our thought process. Now, let me give you some more definition here. Now, I would definitely recommend this book. It's called Anti-Fragile: Things That Gain from Disorder. And see, that is hard for the American mind because we love order. We do not like disorder. Nature, ladies and gentlemen, loves chaos. Most of the time, we cannot predict what nature does. And that's what makes it so exciting, that makes it so wonderful, is that we need to embrace disorder. But there is order within disorder. See, what we think that we cannot predict, we think that's disorder. But here's what I'm going to get at. Now look at biological systems. The author does a really good job. It says focus on fragility rather than predicting and calculating probabilities. See, scientists are so geared, we want to know the probability of something's going to happen. We want to know if we can reduce risk. I am going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, science cannot do that. But it can measure if a system is fragile or anti-fragile or robust. And I'll talk about that. Let me tell you, in an ecological biological system, a fragile system, like our modern agriculture, is extremely efficient. As you become more efficient, you become more fragile because it becomes more complex. A robust system in a biological or an economic system is where you have redundancy. And then anti-fragile is functional redundancy. Let me explain functional redundancy. I never forgot this experience at Dave Brandt's operation. I had just driven 7 hours. I was kind of tired, went to Dave Brandt's farm. He planted a 2-way cover crop mix in a very, very heavy clay soil. It was a rented farm. He was not in a very good mood. He drags me out of the car and says, "Ray, why did these 2 mixes die?" And I looked at him and I said to him, "Dave, why did you only plant 2? He said, "If you would have planted 5, 6, 7, 8, something would have survived. You would have had functional redundancy." Do you know why our forests and prairies have hundreds and thousands of species? So when it floods, something will survive. It will survive. There's nothing more horrible is when you put cover crop seed and everything dies. So you put 1 seed out there, you have no functional redundancy. Our prairies are functional redundant. Our soils are the most redundant ecosystem on the planet. There are millions of species. There could be 50 to 100,000 species in a gram of soil. Maybe even a million species. Redundancy. That's really cool. Science is fragile when it's directed research. Anti-fragile science is tinkering. What I call tinkering is what Gabe does out on his property, or some of you guys that are tinkers. You go and do your own experimentations. That is anti-fragile. That's what we want to do, where you do the science in your own place, more than directed science. And it's going to be holistic. It's got to be whole. Now, what makes regulations when it comes to social things? A fragile society only obeys rules. They only obey the rules. A robust society, they follow principles. But an anti-fragile society, they are virtuous. I have discovered as I go through the country is that the more a society is virtuous, the more anti-fragile it becomes. And the land reflects it. The land reflects it. Ethics. Interesting. Because what this author is saying is about exposure, understanding the exposure we have. Like, for example, the ethics. System without skin in the game. You have no skin in the game. What I've noticed and observed, our country is becoming more when there is no skin in the game. Robust society is they have skin in the game. But here's what we want to be. A system where you have the soul in the game. It's a total different ballgame. You can see it in the landowners. The most robust, anti-fragile landowners, they have the best operation. They have soul in the game. Now, stressors is very interesting. The soil ecosystem cannot handle chronic stress. It can handle an acute stress with recovery. Your grazing lands can handle mob grazing coming in there. It can handle that acute stress. In fact, the ecosystem demands it. It wants it. Do you know how we build muscle? When we pump that iron and we get that acute stress and we build muscle. It wants that stress. But what it cannot handle is like smoke 20 packs of cigarettes, drink a bunch of beer, go exercise, never get to sleep. Then guess what I have? I have chronic stress. The soil is the same, ladies and gentlemen. It cannot handle a huge amounts of fungicides, insecticides, and then you till the snot out of it. That is chronic stressors. The system changes to a different state. So now we got that settled. Let's go. Now, producers. What makes a producer fragile and anti-fragile? Producers that are fragile in their thought process, to their exposure. They hate mistakes. And they don't like mistakes. And because they don't like mistakes, and when they do mistakes, they're usually large mistakes. And debt. Our country has become very fragile because of debt. Your operation becomes very fragile with debt. Debt is fragile. Now, here is what producers that are anti-fragile. They love to make mistakes. Here's what I mean. Little mistakes. When they're tinkering, I love the statement that Gabe Brown makes. He says, if I'm not making a mistake, I am not learning. You want to learn with the little mistakes and embrace them. That's how we learn. That's called the human experience. But we don't want the big ones. Natural ecosystem, they can handle those disturbances. They can handle those stresses. We want to be the same. And they're reversible. And you can quickly overcome them. And guess what? Little to no debt. See, because then you can take those little risks to learn. Because you're not so stressed. I remember a rancher, when we went to go do a talk. This poor rancher, you could see him when we were teaching soil health. He could see the principles, he could embrace them, and he wanted to do so bad. But guess what? He was so afraid because he had so much debt. He was afraid to try. He was afraid to change. It can limit you. Now, and I'm just going to go real quick. You can read this on yourself. I'm just going to pick some of them. One of the things that I've learned from when I learned from my university, and I've noticed when I teach all over the country, we've picked up the same kind of mindset. I don't care what land-grant college you went to. Is sometimes I have the view that my soil was a growing medium. I had a mechanical view of the natural ecosystem. It was not a view of a living, dynamic ecosystem. And it is not that way. Nature, she's self-healing. Your car, your vehicle, it needs continuous repair. There's a difference between the mechanical and the ecological and the living. And I want you to read it because I'm not going to read all of it to you. But the organic, it can recover between stressors. Your car does not need recovery. Your grazing land, it needs recovery. So you read that yourself, but I recommend this book to you. So that's what we're going to build on it. Now, the only thing I know is that I don't know. And here's the Fukushima, did I say it right? Just help me out here. One of the things that science could not do, and we call it the black swan. A black swan is an event, ladies and gentlemen, that happens that we can't predict. They're rare events. World War II wasn't able to be predicted. You can see trends, but you can't predict it. When they designed that wall for that nuclear station, the engineers, they did all powerful mathematics, they got their calculators, they did models, and say, what's the potential of having a tsunami, a black swan event? And guess what? With all their models, all their intelligence, they had a tsunami that went over the wall, and look what it did. We can't predict the next drought. We can't predict the next flood. But what we can do is make our ranch and farm robust so that we can handle some of those events. Okay? Now here's how we're going to start doing that, is to think from an ecological perspective, ladies and gentlemen. And I want you to focus on that key word. There's two words I want you to focus about ecology. So when I left college, this is not the way I was taught. This is not the way I was taught. I wasn't taught interconnectedness. I wasn't taught relationship. Ecology is relationship, me to the microbe, to the earthworm, to the cow, to the grass. Understanding my context. Ecology is about relationship, ladies and gentlemen. Where are you in that context? Everything is interconnected. Everything is one. That is a very powerful principle. Everything is one. So if I go spray a fungicide, how is it going to impact? If I spray insecticide, am I going to hurt the beneficial insects? Am I going to create more of a mess? Interconnectedness. Now, why should I understand ecology? Why should I understand interconnectedness? Because, again, it is connected. Global context here. Why was I so passionate about soil health? This was one of my major reasons. It's because I knew, ladies and gentlemen, what made agriculture very, very fragile is we depend on these two major sources. It's energy and water. In a recent study, it was done and gave this to the Department of Energy. It says, we're in an era that plentiful, low-cost oil is reaching an end. And you guys are saying, but Ray, we live in the Balkan. We just found a lot of oil. You got to remember, ladies and gentlemen, I read 10 or 11 books on geology. We've known about the Balkan for many, many years. We just now have the technology to be able to extract the oil. And I ask you this very simple question. If we have so much oil, why are we still paying $3.20 a gallon? Do not forget, in 2008, we paid $1.80. I'll tell you why we're still paying that high price. But farming comes at a great cost, ladies and gentlemen. We have some people from Canada, Kurt and his family. This is the beautiful part of Canada where they extract oil from the sands, tar sands. I want you to notice how the high cost to run modern agriculture, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the beauty here and look how it's turning. We have to use that kind of resources to run this, ladies and gentlemen. This is the refinement of modern agriculture. It is incredibly fragile, incredibly complex. It runs that whole system, that oil, that energy runs this whole network. It runs everything we do, ladies and gentlemen. And because we depend on that network to run our tractors, to get the pesticide, to get the fertilizer, we make our farms and ranches fragile. What the soil health movement is, in my mind, is the more we get our soils healthy, we depend less on that fragile system. We'll talk about that. Again, that oil, that pesticide, that fertilizer, and deliver that seed came at a very high cost. And it's affected, this is a picture in California. I saw Canada. This is from another part of the world. There is no free lunch. No free lunch. But you're going to say to me, yeah, Ray, that's over there. How about your own neighborhood? How about here in North Dakota? How has it impacted your lives when now we have all kinds of people coming into North Dakota? It's impacted quite a bit. Here's this farmer at his field. They had an oil spill, and he had a foot of oil through that whole field, and he says, I'm not going to be able to farm that for a long, long time. It's even to our own neighborhood. This system, what I call, is a very fragile system. And then, with this precious oil, this precious energy, we were able to create our factory farms. We've changed the genetics. We have manipulated the natural ecosystem. Now, I'm going to ask the audience a very basic question. I'm going to ask them, ladies and gentlemen, please raise your hand. How many have received an agriculture degree, or a degree? Please raise your hand. Okay, now, I'm going to ask you, did any of your professors tell you, Ray, I'm going to say, let me say this again, your goal when you graduate is to help farmers and ranchers to farm in nature's image, to collaborate, to synergize, to nurture, to work with it, to facilitate with it. Your goal is to farm in nature's image and to help farmers and producers. Raise your hand. That's what I thought. Now, people that farm and ranch, how many of your moms and dads told you, now, son and daughter, you're going to inherit this ranch. We're going to bring you part into the business. Your goal is to emulate the natural ecosystem, to work with it. Not manipulate it, not to genetically splice it, not to fumigate it, not to spray it, not to till it to death, to collaborate with it, to understand it, to facilitate. Please raise your hand. Guess what I observed, ladies and gentlemen? When I speak the whole country, that is the same response I get. That's not what we were taught. This is the outcome of that thought process. We do not value the natural ecosystem. We want to control. I learned control and command. That's what I learned. Now, why is this again so fragile? I'll make it real quick. The water issue. Do you know that the Balkan, this incredible thing you guys have, got this right off? It says in 2012, the Balkan oil industry used about 5.5 billion gallons to extract that water. You live in North Dakota. How many inches of rain do you guys get a year? Okay, 12, 13, 14, 16, depending where you're at. That's enough water right now at the current rate to extract all the water from the inhabitants of Fargo. They predict as the Balkan gets more and more developed, it's going to take anywhere from 10 to, in the next 10 to 20 years, 40 to 50,000 more wells will be running, and it's going to take 10.2 billion gallons of water to extract that oil. Interesting. Now, why is our system becoming fragile? It's because more and more fragile. Again, globalization, ladies and gentlemen. Very interesting. This is what's driving the cost of energy. China and India, they want to live like Americans. They want to eat meat. They want to drive a Cadillac. In fact, about 3 or 4 years, the Chinese were stuck. They had a pile up. They were stuck in the car 11 days. It was 60 miles long. I thought in the next 5 years, well, they're going to beat us in buying cars. They beat us in buying cars this year, ladies and gentlemen. They are buying more cars than Americans are. And I asked this very simple question, because I'm not a very bright guy. I say, hey, do we have enough energy to sustain all that? How many of you have been to the East Coast, by the way? Have you ever driven from the East Coast all the way up to New York and go that way? There's 10 lanes. You talk about chronic stress. I came from the West. Shaking, because I never saw so many people. But here's the point. Do you know how many people had 3 or 4 people in the car? A majority of the people had 1 person in the car. The system, again, connectedness. This is important. And again, China and India will increase their oil consumption. But my point here, ladies and gentlemen, our agriculture is based on this very precious resource called oil. But if I make my soil healthy, healthy soil save oil. We're going to talk about that. And we put lots of chemical fertilizer. In fact, we're noticing the more chemical fertilizer we put on in degraded soils, we have a diminishing return. Our yields are not being increasing. The only reason they're increasing, or they do have a slight, is genetics, but it's not fertility. In fact, there's a lot of misgiving that majority of our people think when you put 100 units of N, I expect 100 units of N to go into the soil. That is not true. A majority of the soil provides the nutrients. Recent research they did is they had a radioisotope N15 and they followed the nitrogen molecule all the way up to the plant. Only 30 to 40% of the nitrogen reached the plant. So I want you to think, every time you put that chemical fertilizer out there, only 30 to 40% reached the plant. And they're going to say to me, well, Ray, what happened to the other 60%? And went into these complex pools, and went into the mafia. Who's the mafia? The microbes. They're the first feeders. And went into these complex pools. It is your soils that feed the plant, not nitrogen fertilizer. We'll continue down this road. So, ladies and gentlemen, I said, okay, and I just ran some basic stats. I said, okay, last year we had 84 million, this was in 2010, I think, 84 million acres that was planted in corn. And look at here, ladies and gentlemen, the average, I'm going to use energy equivalents to make chemical fertilizer. This is only chemical fertilizer. It is 18.4 gallons of diesel energy equivalents. You multiply by the acres, it's 1,546,600,000 gallons. And then you divide it by the total cars in the United States, that's enough to pay, to drive all the vehicles, to give it enough fuel for 4 days. Making chemical fertilizer takes a huge amount of energy. It wasn't for free. Okay, so why do I care? This is Dave Brandt's numbers from, and I'm not going to go over them, but this is Dave Brandt in Ohio, 1,400 acres. He's a corn, soybean, wheat farmer. And what I did is, I'm going to build a point here. I want us as producers to focus on the right side of the equation. I mean, on the correct side of the equation. Most producers focus on yield. When you go to the coffee shop, do you brag to your fellow farmers, hey man, I made a lot of money? When we go to the coffee shop, what do we brag about? I made lots of bushels, right? We have been ingrained, bushels, 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 yield. When I as an agronomist, worshipped at that same temple. I'm saying, no, that's a false god. Focus on the right side so you get freedom. If you focus on yield, you will be a slave to yield. If you want freedom from your operation, focus on inputs. Let me show you what happens when you farm like nature. This is a no-till field with corn and soybean. Look at the input costs per bushel. This is regular no-till in Ohio with no diversity. Monoculture, corn and soybean. Their costs a couple of years ago was $5.92 a bushel, with a yield of 120 bushel. What is the price of corn, ladies and gentlemen, right now? Come on, somebody shout it to me. $3.73. $3.73. Wow. Last year it was $7 corn, 7 something. Everybody was making money. Everybody was happy. In fact, I went and stood in front of a large group and said, farmers, how many of you actually think that the commodity price is going to go down? Everybody rose their hand. Then I said, how many of you actually think that the price of fuel and inputs are going to go up? Everybody raised their hand. Interesting. But here, no-till corn, soybean, and wheat. This is Dave, but he uses cover crops. Look at his input cost. $2.36 a bushel and 140 bushels. Do the math in your head. Who made more money? Who made more money? The more you farm in nature's image, the more you're going to make. The more freedom you're going to get. I tell my producers, focus on here. This is freedom. This is freedom. And your freedom is in proportion to your understanding how you're willing to farm in nature's image. Because the first thing people tell me is, well, Ray, how long is it going to take the soil to heal? I said, it depends on you. How committed are you? How are we doing, by the way? This was taken, I got this from a friend of mine. It was a great paper and it was written by the president of Kansas State University, Milton Eisenhower, 1948. It came from a nice article called The Country Gentleman. And this is about conservation. Now remember, NRCS has been around since when, Jay? 1935? 32? Somewhere around there? I don't know. Now, this was written in 1948. He said, for every federal dollar spent in the name of conservation during the past dozen years in the United States has a return of 10 cents. This is when we just started, NRCS was just beginning to start. And so he says, why the two major reasons why we're having such little change and having this awesome agency go out there and teach soil conservation. The number one reason he puts in the article, it is our soil mining attitude. No respect, no virtue, no value for the land. That has been happening for hundreds and hundreds of years. Number two, program handouts. See, government says, well, we can solve the problem because we're going to give you money. We're going to help you out and make the problem worse. The problem was always our lack of understanding and humility and having value for the land. Let me show you what happens when we go out there. And by the way, the article was talking about they were trying to put systems of practices, but it led to a journey of putting single practices out there. Let me show you an example when we have a thinking of single practices. When I walk into a landowner's operation, I want to think holistically. I want to look at the big picture. I want to think ecologically. But what's happening now, this is a no-till field. This is a conventional field. Look at the same soils, ladies and gentlemen. Look at the color. One is a 17-year monoculture soybean rotation, a soybean field, heavily tilled. Look at the color. Look at the forest. And no-tills are doing covers and going this direction, look like this. This is my little version of that little white dot right there is tile drain. Okay? This has been a big thing all over the country. We love tile drain. So I stood up in Washington and talked to a group of people, and they were talking about how wonderful tile drain. And you can see Dave Brand said, Ray, sit down. You're going to say something. He's going to say something. And sure, I stood up and I said, ladies and gentlemen, I don't have a problem with tile drain. But it's another Band-Aid if you're not looking at it holistically. You didn't one time talk about covers, doing no-till. But so you're going to help our landowners put tile drain out there so that we can pollute more effectively. Boy, but we're going to put a bioreactor at the end. I thought the soil, a healthy soil, is a bioreactor. But that bioreactor needs covers. Let me show you what happens when you have a system. And by the way, those systems will leak if they're not covered. They will leak. Let me show you a video to prove my point. Oh, before I go there, look at this, ladies and gentlemen. This is taken by an electron microscope. This is the no-till field. Look at the pores. Look up this is the upper 9 millimeters. Look at here on the conventional. No pore spaces. See, the moment you till, you wake up these bacteria called R strategists, and they start consuming the glues and the organic matter, and the soil's aggregates fall apart. They start feeding it, and then the soil collapses, and the water and the sun and the sand and the flying clays fill up the pore spaces, and the water runs off. So when you put that tile drain in a tilly till, the majority will run off anyway. But when it starts to filtrate, then they become very leaky. But let me show you a very nice little video here. And this is a worm. This is a worm infraultrometer. They're pouring water. Look how much in a healthy no-till system earthworm channels. Look how fast it's taking the water. In a good healthy soil, you should have anywhere from 850 to 1 million earthworms in an acre. So if you go put phosphorus, you go put nitrogen, what's going to happen? And you're connected right to the tile drain. What's going to happen to the phosphorus? It's going to go right into the tile drain. Now, to show you the connectedness, let me show you the other video. Very neat. Now, what they did is they woke into the tile drain. This is done in Ohio, the experiment station. And they put a smoke bomb, and they let the smoke, and look at the smoke coming out of the earthworm holes. Then we go put our manure, we go put our phosphorus, and then we get big articles saying Lake Erie is being polluted by no-till. We're blaming the practices. That's what happens. It's connected to the tile drain. See, but if we don't approach things from a holistic perspective, we're going to make the situation worse. And those tile drains are not cheap. Dave Brandt farms very heavy clay soils. His tile drain are cover crops. Tile drain will not heal soils, ladies and gentlemen. Only covers, manure, carbon, and anything that's carbon-based. It is the microbes, it is the earthworms, it's the biology that heals the soil. That's the beauty about it. Now, let's look at our national context. Remember, we're all dealing with a very degraded resource. This was taken in January. After 66 years of conservation, here's where we're at. This is my observation. I'm going, whoa. I got to experience, I was in eastern Colorado. I got to be in the Dust Bowl. That was very disheartening to me. Okay? This was taken from a picture that was tweeted. This I took with my own personal iPhone as I fly across the country. And I told the EPA, we don't have a runoff problem in this country. They looked at me, boy, that boy smokes cover crops. I said, no, we have an infiltration problem. The moment you say we have a runoff problem, it's reactive. You already missed the mark. Proactive is we have an infiltration problem. We have a soil function problem. We have a dysfunctional water cycle, ladies and gentlemen. That's what we have. This is a functioning water cycle. This is a dysfunctional water cycle. Okay? I'm going to bypass this because of time. How much time do I have, Mr. Fuhrer?
You're doing good, Ray.
Okay. I think we ought to show this because I think you guys need to see what happens if you don't, when you have a dysfunctional water cycle. This is our state agronomist in Virginia.
Runoff and erosion from a conventionally tilled field
Oops.
like this. You're
Not
not
working.
working down here during this.
It's okay. We'll skip that. Now, what do we want to do? What do we want to do with this thought process? We want to do in our ranch and farm, we want to bring ecological memory back. I want to bring ecological memory back. We want to bring an ecotopia to our farm and ranch. We want to restore the planet. I want you to notice this is taken in southern New Mexico, where I went to college, New Mexico State University. I was born in 1961. I did not see this. This is a short, steep prairie. Look what happens when we focus on the tools. See, BLM, our range specialist said the best way to restore the rangeland is to take animals off the land. It's focus on the tools. But the reality is, this is what happens when you take animals off the land. It shifts to a phase shift. It went to a different ecological system. Now that area, look at the bare soil, look at the mesquite, which is heavily fungal dominant. It can survive in that harsh environment. We went from here to here because we didn't understand the ecosystem. We went from that range ground to here because we focused on the tool. It was not about the understanding of the landowner. And look at the results when we take and don't have ecological memory back. When we take animals, you got to remember that short steep prairie in New Mexico had buffalo. The buffalo went from the top, came to the down. That's what it was. And the moment we took animals and we focused on tools and made tools the problem, look at the land responded. Now, some of you are saying, Ray, this is pretty heavy, man. Because we're probably going into this period called cognitive dissonance. What it means is your attitude and your belief are not the same. It's kind of like the old fable. The fox is trying to grab the grapes, and he said, I really want those grapes, but I can't get them. They're pie sour grapes. It's pie sour grapes. Right? What you're talking about, there's no way we can reach that. So we get in our minds, because our attitudes and our beliefs are disconnected. We have sour grapes about it. But I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, soil health is actually an easier way of farming and ranching. And I'm going to show you, we don't have to have cognitive dissonance. We don't have to separate and say, hey, your attitude and your belief can go together. You just got to be willing to be open. But I want you to think about it. Whenever you find yourself on the side of the majority, it's time to pause and reflect. I'm going to tell you, ladies and gentlemen, when I go all over the country, do you think people embrace soil health? University extension and homeless people? No. The farmers and ranchers, the 10% that are really thinking about it seriously, they go, this makes sense. And the movement started because of you guys. That 10%, that precious 10%, and shifted the rest. So I want you to pause about that. Now, here's some of the things I learned when I'm learning about the law of principles of ecology. Everything is connected to everything else. One of the things you need to understand this principle when you're working with your ranch operation, everything's connected. Everything is one. Quantum physics, everything is one. Theology, everything is one. That is such an important principle. Number two, everything must go somewhere, and there is no such thing as a free lunch. You remember seeing that parts of Canada that are being decimated? There's no free lunch. No free lunch. Now, here's the solution. I love this. This is your homework assignment, and I definitely recommend that you guys go see this 20-minute. How many have been on TED? That is an amazing website. Go in there and you have the most ingenious people. Scientists go there and all kinds of people share awesome ideas. There's a Janine Banyas, excellent speaker, talking about biomimicry. It is worth your time. She says, hey, why don't we farm like nature? She's got 3.8 billion years of research and development. She's got 10 or 30 million species with well-adapted solutions. In fact, biomimicry is so cool. Engineers of Chrysler, guess what they're doing? They're starting making cars the shape of that fish. And when they started doing, their oil fuel consumption went down 20%. Very cool. 80% lower emissions. How about this one? These bugs, the Rocky Mountain Institute, very interesting. They have these two insects that never drink water. Pillbug, they get their water through their skin. Their design of their skin has the ability to draw the humidity and aggregate the water to them. They are designing buildings with that same type of skin so that it'll draw the humidity from the outside air and they pipe it right in. Biomimicry. The Wright brothers. How did they figure out how to fly? Was it because they were so smart and ingenious? Folks, we're not super smart. We're just good mimickers. We're good mimickers. But biomimicry's been around a long time, ladies and gentlemen. Job 12:7. It says, but ask the beast, and they will teach you. The template's been telling us, the template's been there for a long, long time. It says, follow it. Emulate it. Understand and embrace its wisdom. Its biomimicry's been around for a long time. I show this picture, our forest, my my farmers, a lot of farmers in Ohio, the Midwest, they are learning how to farm more like the prairie and forest. What do the prairie and forest have in common? Look at the diversity. Look at the architecture. They both have animals in the system. They're closed systems. They're open systems, they're closed systems. But nutrient-wise, they're closed systems. They don't leak readily. They have animals. There's no tillage going on. They don't invert on themselves. They don't invert it. Biomimicry. Now, for us to get to really be passionate about soil health, we have to get to this point, ladies and gentlemen. We have to get away from just focusing on information knowing. Information knowing is knowing data, information. It's like when you first meet a person, you talk about where Ken Miller is from. Ken will tell you, and you say, well, I live here, but informational knowing. Science, informational knowing. We got to take it to a point in our ranches and operation is personal knowing. See, personal knowing is this. Informational knowing is saying, well, I can see with my eyes, I can get the data. That is informational knowing. But personal knowing is, oh, I see. Now I understand how the system works. And it has to be personal, ladies and gentlemen. It has to be personal. That's why I make the statement when I make this. The soil is naked, hungry, thirsty, and running a fever. Because it is alive to me. It is a living ecosystem. It is personal to me. The top farmers and ranchers that I'm exposed, you know what? It is personal to them. Every one of the top farmers and ranchers, it is personal knowing. And they'll make words like this, I love the land. Here's how you get personal with your soil. A shovel. Ladies and gentlemen, I want to ask you a question. How many of you use this instrument of love? And you check your soil on a daily basis. And you're commuting, talking to your earthworms, smelling the actinobacteria, getting high on the smell of jasmine, and speaking to your earthworms. But you got to make sure nobody's seeing you. Then they'll think you smoke too much cover crop. We want that communication. How do you know how your soil is? If you're not digging into it, you're smelling it and you're seeing it. Here's the thing, ladies and gentlemen. This is what in most of the literature you'll see. They say the soil is physical, chemical, and biological. And look at the circles. They're all the same size. They're all the same size. They're saying they're all important equally. I say that's not true. They are important. But I'm saying this is probably more accurate. The biology makes the physical. They help hold the aggregation. They create the biotic glues in the cement that keeps those soil pores open. And then they also mitigate the chemistry. It is biochemistry that runs the inorganic chemistry. Ladies and gentlemen, if we took the plant and the microbe out, what would we have? Geology. Only life can beget life. Soil, this is area of priorities. When I look at my soil, it's this critter. This is the biology. It's the biology that drives both of them. You know what that new science is called? I'm going to write this down. Niche construction. Google it. Niche construction. And that's, okay? Niche construction. So what does niche construction say? See, when Darwin came up with his theories, he said, okay, if animals are put into their environment, they will adapt to the environment. Niche construction said, no. The organisms also modify the environment. Earthworms can lower the pH in the soil. Very cool. These organisms can modify. Fungus can change the pH around them. They can modify their environment. So when I go in with my shovel, I want to see I want to see earthworms called the drillosphere, the agratosphere. I want to see detritus, residue, pores. I want to see your soil look like cottage cheese. I want to see all those spheres present. When I first brought out this, Dave Brand thought I was making them up. I did not make those names up. Ecologists made up it. I want to see worms. I want to see aggregates. I want to see residue on the top. I want to see roots. I want to see pores. I want to see all that present. Because this is the driver. The more I focus on this, the more I become more robust. When I move my cows, I move them for them. Not just for the cows and for the grass, for them. When I do mob grazing and I have a cow pie here and here and here in between that foot, I'm doing it for my microbes because they run the soil universe. They drive it. Look at this beautiful earthworm. And I got special music for you to make it very emotional, to make it personal knowing. This was done by Odette Menard. I never realized that earthworms could do this. There's this thing with a special camera at night. I want you to look at the strength they have. This is why Paul Brown will not go out on his ranch at night. He's afraid they will take him. Where's Paul? I don't know. The dog is barking. Paul's gone. There's so much earthworms out there. Ladies and gentlemen, look at that. Some people, farmers and ranchers say, but I have a residue problem. So they use tillage and they burn it. They burn all that precious carbon. I said, you don't have a residue problem. You have a biology problem. They will take care of the residues. Look at this other one, microbes. I'll come skip here. Look at Dave Brandt's. Look at that nodules. He says, he tells farmers, he said, guys, that's the best urea I ever seen. You can put urea out there that uniform, created by legumes. Now, Rick Haney's test, he's going to be talking about it later on. And I'm so glad we know Rick Haney, because he has an incredible soil test that can help us determine if our system is fragile, robust, and heading towards anti-fragile. Gabe Brown will tell you my soil is robust, but it's not enough. It's never enough. I want to be like the prairie. The more you integrate animals, the more you do zero-till, you go into anti-fragile. That's what I want our systems to be robust. I don't have to be dependent on no one. So am I opposed against fertilizers? No. Am I opposed against some of these chemicals that we use? I say wise usage. But the less you're dependent on them, the more freedom you have. There's Mr. Brown. This man is robust. He's a robust man because his thinking is robust. Look at the way his operation is going. His cropland with no livestock. Look at the organic matter. Cropland with livestock. Look at the organic matter and look at the prairie. He is heading towards robustness. He's anti-fragile. He's making a system where he is dependent on no government. He's not dependent on, eventually not to be dependent on crop insurance, to be dependent on his soil. Gabe told me the most profound thing. We get to drive together a lot. He gets stuck with me in a car and he goes, poor you, poor Ray. No, it was poor Gabe. And he said, what we have to do is to have faith in the system. There was a farmer last night, we talked last night, it was excellent from the board. Who, the man with the yellow shirt, was his name, Jay? Rocky, raise your hand. Where are you? Beautiful man, Rocky. You know what he said last night? He said, I had to have faith and follow what Gabe was doing. He taught me, and now my operation has changed. Now he has robust thinking. This young man, when Gabe spends hours and hours, a lot of people don't realize that Jay, Gabe, and all these guys go all over. Josh, Ken Miller, they go all over the country to teach soil health, to make our country robust, to make it anti-fragile. This young man came to a workshop and listened to Gabe. His name is Darren Williams. In 2 to 3 years, went from conventional to now multi-species cover crops in this operation. He went to no-till. He stepped out on faith. And look what happened. He wants to show you his depths of his soils in Kansas. They're not that great. But in less than 3 to 4 years, he is changing his whole operation. He went from 30 bushel wheat to last year he said he had 70 to 90 bushel wheat in certain fields. with multi-species cover crops because he believed what Gabe was saying. And Gabe was telling him, follow the natural system, mimic nature. Look what happened when he does mob grazing. He did some mob grazing right here. He said, you know what, Ray? You tell him I took a little too much, but then I planted my soybean during the drought year. It got 52 bushel soybean.